Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this very important hearing today. Genetic engineering is woven throughout Connecticut agriculture and agricultural research. Yukon Extension, which is in my district, was among the first in the world to clone animals and have an active hemp and cannabis genetic program. Connecticut dairy farmers use genetically modified corn, beet pulp, and soybeans for livestock feed and feed rations. Another area of genetic engineering research happens in my district as well, and it relates to environmental protection. Yukon Extension is researching how they can breed plants to be responsive to climate change. So, Dr. Chou, can you give me a few examples of how gene editing can lead to climate change mitigation? And what applications of biotechnology have proven most effective for addressing climate change in agriculture?
Thank you for the question. Let me just say that climate change is the most pressing issue facing our farmers right now. And it's because of the unpredictability of the climate they have. Like in California, they've been historically dealing with a drought, but then just recently they had a huge bunch of rain. So it is difficult for farmers to adjust to that. I think plant breeding has a lot to contribute to climate change, both from an adaptive perspective and also from a mitigation perspective. On the adaptive perspective, we can breed plants that can adapt to drought conditions or to high water conditions. Right? From the mitigation perspective, there are scientists that's working on making plants with stronger roots that can sequester carbon for longer. They're creating plants, new cover crops that farmers can plant when the fields are fallow to keep the soil healthy. But instead of just having a non-economic crop, these oilseeds are now gene edited, so can be fed to animals. And that creates a cash crop for the farmers. So we at the plant research community is really excited about these kind of things that could occur. But I think for us, it's not just about climate adaptation and climate mitigation. It's all about creating food and making that food nutritious and tasty for consumers across the board, right? So we are also working on nutrition security. So berries is something that everybody likes. I have two small children, but they don't last very long in my fridge. So just thinking about making berries more available and more shelf-friendly, shelf-safe, fresh longer for consumers, that will have tremendous benefit from a nutritional perspective for us and for the value chain. So you can stay on market shelves longer. So these are the things that are really important. And I think the last thing I want to mention is food waste, right? So I have little kids. Every time I cut an apple, if it's brown, they won't eat it. There is nothing wrong with that apple, right? It tastes fine. So there's a lot of work working on non-browning apples, non-browning potatoes, non-browning lettuce. So it's not about just producing enough food, but also like using the food that we're producing and not wasting it. Because every time we waste food, we're wasting resources, we're wasting water, we're wasting labor, we're wasting gas. So I think those across the board are all these things that we need to do from a climate-friendly perspective in agriculture.
Would the gentlewoman yield?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Just a quick question. How much food is estimated that we waste in the United States each year?
I don't have that figure off the top of my head, but I would think so for potatoes, there's studies that demonstrate if we can just have non-browning potatoes, we will save 1.5 billion pounds of potatoes a year. That's a lot of French fries. So I think if you take that across apples and lettuce, just think about all the lettuce we throw away when it gets brown and we don't finish it by the end of the week. It's a lot, and that's just in our kitchens.
Thank you, Dr. Chou. I can tell you that you have made my colleague, Representative Schreier, Dr. Schreier, very happy because this is something that she talks about often. I just have one follow-up question. Even with these exciting developments, I've also heard concerns that gene editing may drive reliance on environmentally detrimental herbicides. How do you believe we should balance our efforts with climate change mitigation with those concerns?
I think if you look at the research that's happening right now on how gene editing is used in crop species and even in animals, it's broader than just herbicide use. We're talking about nutrition, we're talking about water usage, we're talking about things that would allow us to use less inputs. So I think we have to think broadly and not think about how we use agricultural biotechnology, the 20th century agricultural biotechnology, but thinking more ahead in the 21st century. As we're learning more about plants, we're getting more precise about how we are doing things. And I think that creates a lot of opportunities. So at ASTA, we actually have a website called Innovature that talks about food. It doesn't talk about agriculture, it talks about food and how plant breeding impacts our lives, both from an environmental perspective, but a health perspective. So I really encourage you all to take a look at that because it's very appealing for those. I did not start in ag, so I think it's targeted at folks that are not in ag, which really need to understand and appreciate all the efforts we all put into agriculture.
Thank you so much for being here today and for working with us on sustainable agriculture as we look for ways to address food insecurity. That's something that's big for me. So thank you very much for your work in this area. Mr. Chair, with that, I yield back.